Thank you, Manuel, and thank you to Ian Tres and to the WOC for inviting me here. Well, you have presented, so it's my time to present whatever I'm going to say afterwards. And what I would like also to tell you is that I will be doing it in English, because that's in a long, well, it's 10 years long agreement with Manuel that usually we talk in English. But when we get to the questions and discussion, we can do it in Spanish, and I can reply in the mixture between Portuguese, Catalan, and Castilian, whatever. And so I will stand up, and I have to...
French, and Italian,
again,
and German.
German, no, but actually I can't. But I will stand up because it will help me to go through the presentation. And, well, I would like, as Manuel has told you, I would like to discuss today what is our communication. How do we communicate, and how far have we reached from the models of communication that we were taught to be the ones that would explain the way in which our societies and our communication worked. That is, usually we have, or at least I was, although being young, I grew up in a time where I was told that mass communication would explain how things worked. That was the case during some time, but some things have changed. And this is a talk about change in communication and how that change is changing the society in which we live in. So this is a presentation on the bridges between society and communication. Having said this, I thought that the first that I would try to do was to tell you one story and go through an example of change, both examples of change. One about our news, another one about the way in which we look for entertainment. And later on, I will return to the internet and mass media, which is on the title, Beyond Internet and Mass Media, because I really believe that we are beyond those two dimensions. We really need to find another concept, and not just a concept, the roots of the concept and how it helps us to work. So, given that all this that I have said probably is introducing some question marks in your minds and mine also, how will I do it in 40 minutes? But let's look at our news. And I will invite you to make a voyage to usually a place where we don't actually think that novelty might come, which is, in this case, is Mozambique. Here, so the geography is Africa, is the southern part of Africa, but also the time is September 1st, 2010, so more or less a month ago. And I would argue with you that if we want to look at news and how the news are changing, the way in which our media and our journalists are changing the relationship with their audience, or the way in which they are rebuilding that trust and that need between the two of them, we should look at things like Mozambique. Let me just introduce you to give you a general idea also. Like in South Africa, and like in many African countries, mobile phones and SMS are clearly what people most use. The reasons are well known, why is that? But here I would like just to put this because this was a campaign that Mozambique asks people to send SMS whenever they saw something going wrong in terms of the election period, which was something that happened some time ago. And of course that you can use SMS to look at election fraud, but also to make demonstrations. And that was the case on the days before September 1st, where among the SMS networks, this SMS was sent telling people to go on strike against the rising costs in bread, wood, and fuel. And what happened was that on the 1st of September, we had a large number of riots on the streets of Maputo, which is the capital of Mozambique. And when this happened, this newspaper, which is called A Verdade, The Truth, was, just to situate, this is a newspaper which is a weekly, just goes out once per week. And also, it's free, so you don't have to pay for it. And what happened was that suddenly they decided, well, traditional media, that is television, radio, and the big newspapers, were not saying anything about what was going on the streets. And on Facebook for the newspaper and also on Facebook of the journalists, people were asking, what is happening? Do you know if people can travel to this side of the town? Can they go to the airport? Has anybody got any idea of what is going on? Because no one tells us anything. We are just hearing the noises on the street. We know that the commerce, there are riots on the street, the commerce is closed, etc., etc., etc. And they just decided to open up an SMS number where you could send SMS about the situation. And they used this platform in that very same day, which is a platform built for emergency, like in Haiti and other places of the world, where you can, by SMS, send about the situation, what is going on. And so they started receiving every kind of information from wherever things were happening, and they started to geographically map that. What I would argue like this is that they really are into something different than mass media. From the mass media that we know, the mass media that traditionally covers this kind of events. Because they were going, the journalists just went into the streets, they took their cars, and they were sending SMS and to Facebook and also to the platform stating, okay, in this area of the town you can walk, in this area there are problems, don't go this way, don't go that, just go this, etc., etc. And people were asking things, extraordinary things like, for instance, is there any bakery open where I can get bread? They were asking these kind of things to the journal, to the newspaper. What I would like to argue with you about this is that this raises the fundamental question that always led the reason why the media would exist, which is, what is the usefulness for the people to have the media? Of course, we can discuss the fourth power, but I would argue that that is a condition which is necessary, but doesn't fulfill every expectation from people. So people need to understand how the media might be of use to them. And what they did was answer that under a crisis situation, of course, but they experimented everything from the traditional way to put newspapers on the streets onto whatever you would do on Facebook, etc. No. So this is the argument one, change in media and the way journalists work. It's happening and it can be done. So there's no reason why this kind of approach cannot be copied and put into action here, although our newspapers tend to forget that many times, I would argue. So about our entertainment. This is a web page about the Oscars 2010. And what we know by now is that if we follow what happened since 2003 until 2010, we have this set of data about pirating movies and what has happened in terms of pirating the movies. And this has become, well, let's put it this way. It has become so mainstream, I would argue, that if you look here, you are discussing how many of the movies that were sent to the Oscar juries would leak into the internet for other people. So I would argue that the whole system has so many flaws nowadays that we can build this kind of graphic, understanding when do things have came leaks, telesync leaks, screener leaks, retail DVD leaks, etc. So when we reach the dimension in which you can build statistics on some phenomena, it's because that phenomena has become mainstream and it's not just something that is going on the side. And there are other statistics that shows us that. Well, look, by June 2008 we had 202 million PCs in the world that would run peer-to-peer applications. That seems to be a huge number. But probably more significant, and these are data about Portugal, is that actually when you ask people something like, have you done non-authorized movie downloads, which is something, okay, you're asking if they have committed something which tends to be considered as illegal, 22% of internet users state that, yes, we have done it. So they have no problems to tell this to someone that they don't know about. But when we ask again about downloads, be it illegal or non-illegal, just asking downloads, of movies, we get about 40% of users they are doing. So this is 40% of internet users doing downloads of movies, and 22.3 stating that they are doing it illegally. This is not an issue about if it's legal or not. It's about if it's a crime or not. It's about market opportunities. So it has become that. It has moved from side, something which is considered to be illegal, and moved into something I would argue with you, which has become to be a business opportunity. And we have things like these, the 10 most downloaded movies on BitTorrent available online. We have companies that are starting to do something which is quite different. Probably all of you used to remember when we look at music, charts, which were the musics that were sold. These guys from Big Champagne have these charts that are built all over these brands over here. So what they do is that they look at sales, broadcast, watching and listening, fans, friends, and followers. So they just decided that only selling or buying music is not enough to understand what people do. And probably they are right, because in this very room, I'm not going to ask you, but probably many of you would raise your hands if I would ask if you either on stream or on downloads, you do it the same thing as they do. And every time that we look at this, new technologies, new perspectives, every time that happens, someone is doing something in order to make available more entertainment contents in ways in which we have doubts as to be legal or non-legal. So this is a mainstream happening. It's not something that's happening on a marginal location in our lives. Having given these two examples, I would invite you for a voyage, a quick voyage, but that I need to do in order to argue with you why I believe that we need really to leave internet and mass media behind. And as a concept to explain change in our lives, in our communication. And for that, I would ask for you to go with me and look at three different visions. One from science, one from people at Flickr, and another one from the mass media itself. Let's name it mass media for now. So some thoughts from science are, for instance, in Europe, on the year 2000, we had this network which was called the impact of internet on the mass media in Europe. And we were discussing internet as something that was coming new into a field which was already established, the one of mass media. And we had working groups on newspapers, radio, and television, and then we were discussing how does the internet affect these things. So that was the thought on the beginning of the 2000s. On more close to the year 2010, we were discussing no longer about such issues, but we were discussing issues like, okay, this is media studies, and where does our knowledge, where there is a knowledge gap, how can we build new bridges between what we know and what we don't know? But we had abandoned the idea that it was something like the internet and the mass media. Now let's look at other people's thoughts and creativity, which I would argue it's the empirical study of the internet, and where we also need to put some creativity. What I did was a very simple exercise that you can do if you have your laptops or mobile phones. You can do the same. Go into Flickr and just look at how people tag mediation. That is, the way in which we communicate. What names do they give to those things? And when we search for internet and mass media tags on Flickr, we get images like these, which I will not describe because they talk for themselves. Like this one, or that one, or this one about the death of Canadian newspapers. We get things like this. We get icons like this one over here. We get all these kind of messages about data and what we do with it. Strangely enough, we get on internet and mass media also the mobile dimension of things. We get books, and we get laptops, which would be arguable to be found. And what does it happen when we look at internet, at how people tag these things? We get, for instance, this, which is media archaeology, as probably you know. We get places and signs places of our life, we get this idea that something might be temporary and available, but we need it. We look at this kind of gadgets. We have this idea that internet connects these two things. And we have also some humor on internet switch, do not turn off, or people that really put the internet in everything that goes in our lives. For those that are not recognizing these are M&Ms upside down. And what about mass media? Well, this is what people call mass media, and this is what people call mass media. But in reality, if we look at the dimension of quantity, people use much more internet or in mass media, or just internet, rather than mass media. And this might be a sign also for us, which are researchers and look at not just what people do, but also what people put into their representations of reality. And now let's look on the third dimension that I promised to ask for you to travel with me, which is views from the media business itself, or which has this subtitle, or how every media dies even before the global crisis of media. Because by 2003 we were already discussing that music would die. By 2006 we were discussing that the newspapers would die or someone had killed them. By 2008 we were discussing the end of books. In 2009 we were discussing the disappearance of cinema as we have known it up until now. But strangely enough, by looking at the mass media, we are also told that the internet and television will be two of the 10 great ideas for the next 10 years. So what we get is a sense of a huge confusion about things. We know that they are important. We know that they will have a role in our life. We are killing them. We have them also living side by side with us. So this has become what we can call not a cloud computing, but a cloud of different opportunities and different possibilities, but not chosen, not decided yet. Even us, as academics, tend to write things like this, like the end of television, and discuss if things are going to be there or not for the next 10 years, etc. So we are all discussing these issues. And what I believe that we can extract from that cloud of opportunities and possibilities is something like this. Is there still room to say mass media, to study mass media? And I would argue with you that probably you have reached that is where I would like to go. The idea that the concept doesn't hold no longer. That we can no longer think of mass media because we don't, although at the same time we say that mass media exists, we kill it every time that we talk about it because it's something different from what we have learned that it was, and we are giving uses to it which are different from what we learned and act upon during our early lives. So the question is, should we choose internet and mass media or something else? Because mass media all alone no longer explains how things work. And what I need now to say to you is that I believe that we are witnessing what we can call the erosion of a previous communicational paradigm and the rise of a new one, which is not something new, because on the history of media and the history of communication, we have witnessed different stages and different models of communication. I will return that to the later stage today, but by counting, we can put at least 3 before the emergence of this new one. And it is true also that since the 1990s, we have been questioning change both in production of media, in distribution, and of course, when we discuss distribution and production, we are also discussing consumption of its outputs, and in all the dimensions in which we talked about, that is knowledge, entertainment, information, etc. And by doing so, we are discussing what is communication in our contemporary societies. This is the ground where I would like to take this discussion into a next level so that we can reach the time that we decided to have for today to discuss this. And the reason why I believe it is important to do so is because if we want to look at social change in our era, we have to understand communication change. And to understand communication change is to understand how the model of communication of our times is, acts, works, is appropriated, all the different dimensions of it. And so, where do I, as a researcher, see change in terms of communication? Well, it's not just, I showed you two examples in the beginning, but those are examples, that's not theory about it. So let's look at change from a theoretical point of view. And one of them, I would argue, is that we can say, hello information, goodbye news. And that has to do with the social value that we attribute to things, that we give to things. Because we used to say that an informed person was a person that read the news. And today we say that information is the key to our lives. So news and information are not exactly the same thing, although in Portuguese we can say that sometimes we say the same word for the two, but in concept and in practicality they are different one from the other. Change can also be seen that although we are changing things, this is about the killing and the rebirth of the media in this whole process, is that in communication, or at least in communication in terms of mediation, I would argue with you that innovation is almost always incremental. Because what we do is that we move things from one, this is music and this is music, although the quality of this is much higher than this. This is also newspaper, this is also newspaper, this is a free newspaper, and this is a paid newspaper. And so I would argue also that we must look from a theoretical point of view at this idea of innovation, how things are rapidly changing from a dual perspective. That is, there is change, sometimes it's more than incremental, it's radical change in terms of the media, but in many things we see much more continuity than ruptures in terms of the media. We can also say that, theoretically, that we see that our world, our societies try to build themselves on the idea of cultural industry narratives. That is, how do we look at culture and disseminate culture in terms of our societies? And many countries decide to do so by movies. Others decide by doing by television in terms of series, be it animation, be it soap operas, action series, etc., or by games. So this is also the story of our time. We specialize or we develop our societies by looking at those three different narratives in terms of culture and cultural industry. Another one, I would argue also, is the idea of users as distributors. That is something which has become increasingly new. And, well, of course, we have talked about torrents and peer-to-peer, etc. But it is true also that when we go into the Google or into Facebook, whatever, and when we decide to say that we like something or that we are sending something, this news, to someone else, we are distributing that. The distribution is no longer in the hands just of the institutions themselves. It has become also something that is shared with the individuals. And another one is this idea of open creativity or open source of life, which I wrote like this, which has to do with all the things, all the stuff that we use in our computers, and also the way in which companies have started looking at the creativity that comes from others, from outside their own expertise or their own institutions. And also another one is the phone in our lives. Phone used to be this. It has become increasingly this and this. And that is also a fundamental change in the way in which we relate to media. But even if we look at the ones that we were talking about as mass media, the ones that we grew up with, they are living different lives today than they had previously. Radio has a third life. It has moved from living rooms to the cars and to the computers. Of course, I'm not an example, empirically stating, but the way, how do I spend my days at the walk at the N3 Mediatic building? I listen to radio from Portugal. So I'm working at N3 and listening to what goes on in Portugal through the internet. And another one I would argue also about television is that we grew up with television as a technology, but are we able to state what television is today? Probably television has become increasingly defined by all of these things on the right corner than from these things on the left corner. And that should tell us also something. It tells us probably that our concepts in terms of describing what television is no longer work also, for the majority of them that we learned. And even newspapers, which used to be like this, have become increasingly like this. And this is not just the multimedia dimension, is that they are trying to adapt to a reality that they cannot domesticate. I would argue by trying to become news agencies themselves. News agencies that deal with their audiences, which are not other newspapers, are people, ordinary people, but nevertheless that they are trying to evolve to some model which is completely different from the organization of traditional newspapers. And all of this is reunited on this idea that everyday life and democracy is more and more immersed in mediation, as Manuel has also showed us in his latest book. And so what used to be life has become increasingly all of this over here. And I was thinking also that some of our colleagues from the Lisbon meetings about the branding would probably like to look at all the brands that we have here. So all of these are signs of change. And the question, of course, is how do we make sense from them? And I would argue with you that what we need to address is the idea that there is a communicational model of the network society, and that we could call it networked communication, simply networked communication, because I would argue with you that the concept holds in itself the explanation of what we are talking about. So, networked communication is something that is shaped by three strong forces in our societies, being the communicational globalization process that started around the 90s by satellite television and evolved at a later stage for the internet. That is clearly one of the forces that shaped the existence of what we can call today network communication. The second one is the idea of networked mediation. And let's for a moment look at what we do in our lives with the media, with mediation that surrounds us. When we are looking at blogs, when we are working with blogs, when we are looking or browsing through YouTube or uploading things, when we are on Twitter, when we are using SMS for the marches in Mozambique or for what happened in Spain after the bombings in Atocha, we are doing what Manuel Castells calls self-mass communication. When we appropriate all those different ways in which we work with the media, we are clearly into self-mass communication. But when we are using Messenger from Microsoft or Google Talk or Skype, I would argue that we are doing something different. Although different from self-mass communication, but also different from what we used to do with the concept. Because we all know about interpersonal communication, but I would argue that this use, this appropriation of its uses, is what we can call multimedia interpersonal communication. It's still interpersonal communication, but has achieved a higher stage of complexity and of different appropriations than what we used to do with interpersonal communication. And for instance, when we are using Facebook, we are doing one-to-many mediated communication, because actually we know we might not remember all the 4,000 or the 150 friends that we have, but we know how many they are, and we know that they appear, and we know that probably they will receive the message. So it's a kind of being like in this room, doing one-to-many communication, just doing it on a different time and space frame. But of course, that we have not lost what we had already. And so we still have this. or this, just to give two icons of what we are talking about, because this is mass communication, it still will be mass communication. And just to remember that communication is not all mediated, we have non-mediated face-to-face communication also. So this is our communication. This is the way in which we communicate with the people that matter for us in the different dimensions, as persons, as part of institutions, etc. And the examples are, of course, around. I will go very fast. It's just that we have Facebook and we have TV, but when we have a campaign, because the moments, the truly important moments that count in our lives and that bring a lot of people, a lot of institutions and a lot of organizations into the field are the moments in which experimentation becomes fully, also when we become fully aware of experimenting the media, I would argue with you. And so an electoral campaign is precisely that. It's combining all things from television to Facebook, mobile phones, SMS messengers. And this is just to show that I would argue with you that the second force that shaped what is today, what I would argue is today network communication, is precisely network mediation. This is kind of strange putting things like this, but we are discussing the social science approach, although this is more mathematics. But I believe that this shows more or less how do these things come together. Because, and this is also a fundamental dimension on media studies, for long we have been discussing the idea that it's like every one of us, it's like I only read newspapers, Manuel only listens to radio, Emma only sees television, but that's not reality because we use a multitude of media in our lives. We don't use just one, but we study it as if everybody just listened to one, read one, or see another. And so, and the last force would be the idea of how we combine high interactivity, which is usually associated with the internet, with low interactivity that used to be ascribed to television viewing, the traditional television at least. And so the third force acting upon change, I would argue with you, it's precisely this idea that we have choice of different interactivity dimensions. We can go for high and low, and we decide to do it and when. If when we reach home at night we want to have low interactivity, we just go on and turn things on and zap through them. If we want higher interactivity, we'll do something different. So network communication is the idea that, okay, if we have communication models in our society and we bring them into us, I would argue also that we, by using them, change the communicational paradigms that we have. So we have looked at things that seem to change, we have looked at forces acting upon that change, and would also like to bring you into this idea of communicational paradigms and how do we have different communicational paradigms for different models of communication. And when that happens, when we change those paradigms, we also format what a given media system, the media system being here the institutionalization of the different actors and institutions that is in society around media. So the question is here, and you can roll the dice, and of course you can say no or maybe, but I would argue that yes, that we have a new communicational paradigm. And very quickly, it has to do with the idea that we have evolved from a culture that would relate much more into reading, into one that relates much more into moving images. I would argue for you that when we read a book, we make movies in our heads. And that is not just a change of the way in which we look. It's really the way in which we tend to, in between commas, work in a society like ours in terms of mediation. So we have rhetoric based on moving image. We have another thing which is fundamentally important is the new dynamics of accessibility, ranging from availability to mobility in ways which are rather different from the previous paradigms of communication. We have moved many of our attention into the dimension of you or we, which shows us that there is a change in the social value of user-generated content, which used to be something which was poorly viewed, but today it's looked at as something which has more importance. Also, another thing that has changed, and I will try to interpret it by showing these three different dimensions of giving the news, is that we have also ascribed similar social value to multiple models of newscasts, which is also a fundamental change, because we used to say that this is where quality lies, this is where all the journalists want to move into, and actually today we have multiple paths of quality and multiple paths of where professionals want to be and work. And the last one, in that trying here to bring in the idea of a communicational paradigm, a different one for networked communication, is in entertainment. Because we have innovated entertainment models, but also in the way in which we tell our stories. This is something for discussion afterwards or in another day in terms of the seminars, but I would also like to raise it here, because I think that we have different ways of telling the same stories, which traditionally go into, if we are standing in the West, we are looking at how in Greece, in ancient Greece, things worked in terms of entertainment. But actually we are telling the same stories, but in every communication model we tend to tell them differently. And that is something which I believe is also of importance to discuss. So network communication is about mediation, is about networks, and mediation, and this is another, I believe, another dimension of importance, is about the roles of screens. Because what I would also like to argue with you is that we have to increasingly think of screens, because screens are the only dimension that is common to all, or increasingly common to all dimensions of mediation. So if there is something in common between the different ways in which we appropriate the media, is the screens which are present in all of them. With different screens, we develop different interactivities. Screens, of course, are the product of all those dimensions. They're present. And if we think of the way in which we interact with them, we probably will think, as always, there is a dialectic in the process, so, or a duality at least. We can think in screens in terms of broadcast or think in screens in terms of search. Broadcast would be what we do for low interactivity practices. Search is what we do for high interactivity practices. And so we have two networks of practices with two central nodes. And is this the minimum common denominator to understand what is networked communication? Yes, but we cannot forget that, like Manuel Castells stated, the ones that build the networks are we. So the hypertext is in ourselves, it's not on the technology. And we use it for personal and collective projects. And when we do it, we combine all these different media in what we do. So network communication is network building, is adding up all those different dimensions, and is a space where the user and audience meet. And I here withdraw from Roger Silverstone the idea of the participant. So we can no longer think of user of the internet and audiences of media, because probably we are the very one and same. So in the process, there is something in terms of ourselves that is evolving, that is changing. And that is the idea of the participant. And when mediation change, media diets change, media matrix, or the way in which we think for what does the media work for change, media systems develop, and the participant has a new central role in this process. As we have seen, we are distributors, we are innovators, we are classificators of experience when we do reviews of books, when we go onto Facebook, when we do reviews of trips, when we write on blogs or become journalists. So communication today is probably all that we have seen, and the idea that we still need to look at it from those three different dimensions that in terms of media studies we have always looked at. We have to look at technology, contents, and uses. And remix, because we are remixing the older and the new through mediation. We are doing the technological remix because we are combining multiple screens in our practices. Content remix because the content is equal and different at the same times between those screens, and then we can discuss that at a later stage today for discussion. Sometimes we will be push audiences, other times we will be pull users, and we will be doing zapping, and we'll be doing search. And communication today is probably what I can leave you with are 5 images and a movie, because it's everything. It's this, it's this, it's this, it's this, and probably it's also this. Thank you. And we can leave it with no sound. There's no need for sound anymore.
Thank you very much, Gustavo Cardoso, for this most innovative presentation in which you have remixed advanced communication theory